Today we take a look at the biggest snake moves in NBA history. Of course, the two that come to mind right away are always Kevin Durant abandoning his team and going to the Warriors, and LeBron James doing the same to the Cleveland Cavaliers. But we hear about these enough, so instead we're going to be focusing on some that aren't really talked about as often. Like for example, Andre Iguodala isn't often referred to as a snake, but he kind of did the exact same thing that Kevin Durant did first. He had spent his entire early career playing for the 76ers and started to develop into a star. By 2012, he had even made his first All-Star team and led the 76ers into the second round of the playoffs. But after the season, due to the fact that he only had 1 year left on his contract, Billy traded him to the Denver Nuggets. And in that 1 year, Iguodala really transformed that team. With very few other roster moves, the addition of Andre took them from 38-28 record to 57-25 the next season. They looked like real contenders at time, which is why George Karl won the Coach of the Year award. But when they lost in the first round to the Warriors, George Karl was fired just 29 days after winning Coach of the Year. And things got worse because the Nuggets offered Iguodala a 5-year contract to stay in Denver, but instead he took a smaller 4-year deal to join the Golden State Warriors, the team that just beat them. And it became the first time that the Warriors would steal a player that would make them into a super team. No matter how you spin it, nothing looks good about joining the team that just beat you. But while we're still speaking of George Karl, multiple players throughout the years have actually been referring to him as a snake. And it's interesting, it all started back in 2011. Karl was coaching the Nuggets, who had finally traded Carmelo Anthony to the Knicks. Well, right after the trade, Karl went to the media and questioned Melo's efforts on defense and wondered if it would ever get better in New York, to which Carmelo Anthony tweeted, "When the grass is cut, the snakes will show." I don't know how mad Melo could have really been at this after all he put Denver through, and after his actual lack of effort on defense. It wasn't a one-time thing for George Karl, because after Iguodala and the Nuggets lost that previously mentioned series to the Warriors, Karl came out and said that he thinks Andre was a mole for Golden State during their series, to which Andre tweeted out, "When the grass is cut." The Melo no defense thing, totally understandable, but calling your star an inside man for the other team? Come on now. Ty Lawson also once randomly tweeted, "Too many snakes in the field," while playing for the Nuggets. There wasn't any clarification on who the tweet was about, but we're starting to see a trend here. Because then in 2015, while he was coaching the Sacramento Kings, even DeMarcus Cousins tweeted out 2 grass and a snake emoji. So moral of the story, this guy is likely a snake. Now speaking of Karls, Carlos Boozer is another one. So he was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers 35th overall in 2002, and he turned out to be a star right away, putting up 15-11 in just his second season. The Cavs were thrilled to have found a guy like him in the second round, and even more thrilled to be able to have him long term to play with newly drafted LeBron James. Or so they thought. Because after the 03 and 4 season, the Cavs had the option to let Carlos become a restricted free agent, or keep him for 1 more year at a $700,000 salary. Well, when he verbally committed to a 6-year, $39 million contract, the Cavs released him from his current deal and made him a restricted free agent so he could sign a new one. Well, as soon as this happened, the Utah Jazz offered Boozer a 6-year, $70 million contract that the Cavs just couldn't match, so he signed there instead. And obviously it makes sense, who wouldn't turn around and sign a contract for almost double the value? But it was the initial lie to his team on top of his comments afterwards, where he said there was no commitment. It's unfortunate how the turn of events went through media. I'm not a guy that gives my word and takes it away. Well, believe who you want here, but I think he's the snake. Now there's no arguing or debate about the betrayal that went on between the Dallas Mavericks and DeAndre Jordan back in 2015. You see, 2015 was right in the middle of the Lob City Clippers, which DeAndre was a huge part of. This was right in the middle of him making All-NBA and All-Defensive teams every year. He was the centerpiece of their defense. Well, the Dallas Mavericks just so happened to have been in desperate search for a player exactly like him. So they offered DeAndre Jordan a 4-year, $80 million contract that he verbally accepted. Well, when this news broke, basically the entire Clippers team drove to his house to talk him into backing out. JJ Redick, Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, Steve Ballmer, Doc Rivers, and Paul Pierce were all there, leading to Blake posting the chair picture that was supposed to be him locking out the Mavericks. Well, all these guys hung out with him for a few days until he changed his mind, and he signed an $88 million deal with the Clippers instead. I don't think I'd technically call this one a snake move because LA just wanted to keep their guy, but anytime you agree to a contract then back out, not a good look. The way that Vince Carter left the Toronto Raptors also wasn't a very good look. The Raptors drafted Vince 5th overall, and he quickly became their superstar and a fan favorite. He'd been an all-star every season he was there aside from his rookie year. Vince put basketball on the map in Canada and was their first ever real superstar. But by his 7th season there, he was completely done with this team that was still struggling. Even though he was in just his 3rd season of a new 6-year deal he signed with them, in that year he wanted a trade so bad he basically gave up. He averaged a career low 16 points a game at the time, made up multiple injuries so he wouldn't have to play in games, and of course did away with dunks and flashy plays, so the Toronto fanbase completely turned on him. He eventually got what he wanted and was traded to the New Jersey Nets, but for years after that, thanks to how he went about demanding a trade, he was heavily booed every time he stepped foot in Toronto. Ray Allen, of course, is another guy that turned his back on a team that loved him, and it all started when he left the Celtics to join their rivals, the Miami Heat, back in 2012. It would have been bad enough to join the rival team that was beating you down every year, but the fact that he left the Celtics to take a smaller deal from Miami and didn't tell any of his teammates is where the real betrayal came in. He was the third member of Boston's Big Three and a huge key factor to their team, so for him to just leave like that was a big deal. So big that Paul Pierce didn't talk to him for years afterwards, and Kevin Garnett wouldn't say a word to Ray Allen until 10 years later when Kobe's passing made him finally put everything into perspective. Ray Allen always seemed like a good dude, but he definitely turned his back on his team. It's not always the player that's the snake though, because here's an example of a team taking on that role. In 2011, Linsanity started, and we all know the story and what happened. A bench player that broke out when Carmelo Anthony was injured, hit game winners, beat Kobe, and took the NBA by storm. Well, his season ended due to an injury, and in that offseason, he was a restricted free agent. The New York Knicks told him, go look for offers and we'll match anything up to $1 billion to keep you. Well, the Rockets offered Jeremy $25 million, and the Knicks let him walk. It made no sense because the Knicks desperately needed a starting point guard, but when rumors came out that Carmelo Anthony didn't like Lin on the team because he was taking all the spotlight, things started to add up. But listen, if you say you're going to keep a guy for any amount of money, then can't afford to give him $25 million, it's better to just keep your mouth shut. Because this was just a bad look on them, because it proves that they didn't believe he had that much free agency value. Of course, this isn't the only time a team has been a snake to a player, because we all remember the Isaiah Thomas situation. They played him hurt, lied to him about his injury, he played an entire playoff series through it, causing it to get worse. Then the Celtics traded him at the end of the year like it was just a business decision. Sure, the NBA is a business, but they ruined his career and just moved on with their lives. This is easily one of the biggest snake moves I've ever heard of, and it shows why some players don't feel bad about having no loyalty to their teams. But speaking about having no loyalty, that brings us right to Elton Brand, the former first overall pick. And Brand had become a star for the Clippers, even though they were mostly always a bad team and he rarely had help. He was a 20-10 guy nearly every single season. Well, in the 2008 offseason, Brand had a player option for the upcoming year. So he told his very close friend at the time, Baron Davis, that if he joined the Clippers, he would opt in and they could play together. Well, Baron Davis joins the Clippers, signs a long-term deal with them, then Elton Brand opts out of his contract and joins the Philadelphia 76ers to make more money. We all understand the idea of wanting to make more money, but what was the entire point of backstabbing his friend like that? Sure, the offer might not have come in until after Baron signed with the Clippers, but at that point they already had an agreement and it was his job to stick to it. I guess it was only karma that Elton Brand's career just kind of fell apart on the 76ers after this. Now, one of the biggest snake moves of all time comes from Derek Fisher. You see, in 2004, Fisher signed a 6-year deal with the Golden State Warriors. 2 years later, he was traded to the Utah Jazz. Well, at the end of the season in 2007, he goes to the team and asks them to release him from his contract so he could relocate to a team in a city that would have the right combination of specialists that could help fight his daughter's poor eye condition. And the Jazz did the right thing. They accepted his offer and released him, only for him to rejoin the Los Angeles Lakers 2 weeks later, who had just put together a championship roster. Afterward, the Jazz owner came out and said the fact that Derek Fisher went back to LA looked real fishy, but going on to say he didn't believe Derek Fisher would do anything underhanded. But throughout his time in LA, we got to see the kind of guy that Derek really was, so I wouldn't give him any of the benefit of the doubt here at all. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.